The objective today is to explain the purpose of if statements in programs. So remember we used a new UI element called a text area last time. And you can use setText with the text area element just like you would with the text label. But instead of a static text in the label, your text area will combine your predetermined words with the words entered by a user. So if we want to combine user input with a default text, we can do so with string concatenation. And together with text area, we can use this ability to compose longer messages based on user input. So your first think right share is what does text area do? And your second one is what does string concatenation mean? Another thing from last time I want us to practice right away is narrating code. So I'll go ahead and do that right now, and I'm not even going to read this part. I'm just going to do what I've started to become used to doing, and that is narrating code by looking at things and pointing to other things. So essentially, there's an event handler here that says when I click something called input screen, it's going to start this function that sets a screen to another screen with the title of story screen. Maybe I should say ID. So this screen has an ID of story screen, and the built-in function will go ahead and take my user to the new screen. And then from there, there's going to be several variables, plural noun, noun 1, 2, song, verb. And what these apparently are doing is allowing a user to put text into these types of IDs, and JavaScript will get the text from each one. And I assume the user is supposed to put a noun here, and a song here, etc. And then, apparently, after all of those variables are established, there's another variable that will take these variables. Okay, stay with me. I know I've said variables a lot, but it'll take these ones and place them in different positions throughout this paragraph to create a Mad Lib. And that Mad Lib is going to be set, presumably, on this story screen right here. Okay, so that was my narration. I'd like you to give it a try. And I challenge you to do this without rewinding me at all or looking back at the written narration I gave you here. So go for it. Good luck. There's almost no way to get this wrong. I'm just looking for an opportunity to give you feedback. Okay, so right here I want to take about 20 minutes for you to get as deep into the code as you can, but no more than 20 minutes. Your first task is to create 2 screens for your app, so that's including the design elements in each one. And in terms of a requirement I'm looking for is I want you to request at least 3 separate words from the user. You don't have to go as far as I did in my example with the 5 variables, but at least 3 separate words, and then create event handlers for the next and play again buttons to respond to clicks. Now you're going to use set screen in the event handlers to get the screen navigation working. And if you follow this link right here, I'll go ahead and pull that up for you. Okay, so here we are, and if you click right here, even whether it's in code or design, you can go back and forth between the screens. But here in design, you have the ability to create a new screen and call it whatever you want. My new screen. Oh, I want to use the camel case style. There we go, my screen. And then your think right share for this is to just paste that code on the canvas showing your new screen and the event handlers for the next and play again button. So you should be coming back now from that exercise. Some of this code will look familiar to you. Now it's very easy to reset all your variables to empty if a player chooses to play again. My think right share here is when the button named story screen is clicked, what will happen to the variables named plural noun, noun input, noun out to output, etc. What's going to happen to these? What are they going to be set to? And another quick follow-up question for the code is like, what does this output to? So if you got those correct, you're ready for this concept of conditionals. The question starts with how would we make sure this app is being used correctly? How do we ensure all boxes are filled before moving on to the next screen? So let's define some terms here before I show you how. An if statement is a common programming structure that implements conditional statements. What is a conditional? It's another term for if statements. These are statements that only run under certain conditions. And this last word's tricky, and I guarantee it'll be on the test. Selection. Selection is a generic term for a type of programming statement, that's usually an if statement, that uses a Boolean condition to determine or select whether or not to run a certain block of statements. So let's think about this first. I'm going to give you two sentences, and you tell me which number makes the most sense. When the button is clicked, add 1 to the score. Or do you like this second sentence? If the button is clicked, add 1 to the score. And another quick one here. When the score reaches 20, set the screen to game over. If the score reaches 20, set the screen to game over. Which one of those two makes sense, and why do you think that? I'm sorry to give you a little trickery here, but there is no right answer. Now in English, both pairs of sentences basically mean the same thing. However, in programming, using the words if and when map to some expectations about how the underlying code is written. So here's the difference. When is used in reference to an event. So that's to say when something happens, respond in such and such way. If is used when referencing a decision about whether or not to execute a certain piece of code. If something is true, then do this. Otherwise, do that. Think right share here, what is the difference between when and if in the JavaScript programming terms? So here's a good visual for you. If statements exist so that your program can adapt, respond, or make choices about whether or not to execute certain portions of code based on some condition that you check while the program is executing. Now, because it involves checking conditions, these statements are sometimes called conditional statements or just conditionals. And a conditional statement requires a conditional expression, something that is either true or false, and it's what an if statement uses to decide whether or not to execute a certain portion of code. So really pay attention to this word right here, expression. That has been showing up on some of your practice questions for the test. And a good way to remember what an expression is there just has to be some sort of result that comes from an expression. And also, what does this if statement look like? Does it look like something we were seeing when we were studying algorithms? Well, if we're using if statements, we're creating algorithms. Because you'll either have one of two paths to follow. You'll either go this way or go that way, so thus algorithm. Now, the whole point is to be able to handle cases where you can't know ahead of time whether or when certain conditions will exist in your program. So you have to write code to say something like, okay, at this point in the program, if such and such is true, then do this. Otherwise, do that. My example before would be something like, if the text box is empty, say to the user, not finished. Else, move to the next screen to show the Mad Lib paragraph. Now you can imagine how important this is on certain websites or apps where after you click submit, you can't go back without deleting all your previous work. And imagine a credit card application. If you don't fill in the address box, the credit card company would not know where to send your new card. So there are so many different scenarios where you can imagine these if statements would need to be used. So if we have time in class here, I really want you to play this game, and I want you to look for opportunities where you would appreciate having an if statement. Now don't lose track of time, though, and forget to do the DOL. That's your last thing you need to do here today. And just make sure with 5 minutes left of class, you can come back here and answer the IB question, or the fill in the blank here, of all these attributes. What did today's lesson reflect the most? And then here's your DOL. What is the purpose of an if statement? And in this given example of a picture of the game, tell me when or why I would want to use an if statement in this scenario.